So I have 3 questions here, and I'll take them one by one. Maybe because of Samir's question, we need to define what is TDD, what's test first, and so on. So, okay, let's start with this. What is TDD for you?
Okay. So TDD is test-driven development. It's a practice in which you have to understand what you're building before you start building it, or expressing your understanding. When you design anything, when you design something for people to use, what you do is that you're communicating your solution. Yeah. If you design a bag for a supermarket, you're just showing to some model of the bag. So you communicate that decision. Here's how I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to solve this problem this way. In programming, you're telling that to the machine. This is how I'm going to solve this problem. And you create a promise. This is a relationship between 2 objects. I promise to that object that if I do this, I'm going to get that result. And so when you write a test, you're actually writing a promise. And you cannot break the heart of a test. Therefore, you will write the code to fulfill that promise. And you develop a loving relationship with your code. It's so much fun. Because you always know what you're going to do next. And that is satisfying the promise that you have made yourself. By doing that, by establishing how the pieces of code are going to work with each other, you get a much better clear, readable code, because you're describing how you wished your code would work. And of course, you can be very selfish now. I want this beautiful method for my class. Even before the class exists, you go, I want this beautiful method. And then you end up with classes with beautiful methods. So you get nicely designed API just through your selfishness. And you achieve that through this practice, which is TDD. Is that clear?
That was the most profound definition of TDD that I've ever seen in my life.
I want to add something to it, which is also that it really helps you to find out whether you've broken the promises that other people have made about the code. So one of the things, it's not just I'm writing some tests and my code passes my tests. I'm running everybody else's tests, and I'm now a bit more confident to write code and change their code because they've preserved what it was supposed to do in the tests, if they've written good tests.
I would like to add something more about what is not TDD, because sometimes I've heard these ideas. It's not TDD if you don't refactor, just to make it short. I've heard this, especially people from Portugal told me that is very often understood there, that TDD is write test, write code, write test, write code, write test, write code. So it's not only that. And the other one is not enough to write the test first. It's generally, well, there are 2 different ways of thinking about it. One is that you first do a design diagram, and then you write the tests based on that design diagram, and then you write the code. And this was called, like, it's test first programming. And the way J.B. Rainsberger explained it to me is that TDD is, you start without this design diagram. You do the design in all the phases during the red, the green, and the refactoring phase, but you don't start by thinking a lot about this. Now, of course, and we can discuss a lot more about this, you can do less design upfront, more design upfront. It's still TDD in my view, but it's a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, just to clarify, like I didn't say that TDD is not design, I just said that it doesn't lead to good design, by the way, but it's still part of, you still use it as part of your design toolkit. It's just not necessarily that you lead to a good one. But I think that the guy said almost everything that I would agree anyway. So.
I'd like to put in a different way of describing it, just to kick off some discussion, hopefully. without tests, you're assuming that you're right until you're inevitably proved wrong. And with tests, you're assuming first that you're wrong until you can prove yourself right. And the most important thing about TDD is deciding how do you prove that you're right.
Okay. Now, the first real question here is TDD the right tool for complex UIs? What do you think?
No.
I have used TDD for UI in two different parts, two different systems. One of them was a WPF application. And we used TDD to test drive the user interface. And it helped with complex interfaces because you can grow them incrementally. So the things we were testing were, for example, is this control data bound to the right thing? Is this control displayed when it should be displayed? If you check this checkbox, is this control hidden? And many things like that. So I did that. I also did similar things with Jasmine on JavaScript, so UI on web applications. Again, it's helpful. On the other hand, what I found is that it's much more helpful for me to first figure out which are the interactions in the user interface and then slice them and then implement the whole thing. So just to slice from the user interface all the way down and then iterate over this. But so I cannot say that TDD is very useful or not. I can just share this experience. It has helped by structuring a bit how we work, but there are at least two different ways of doing that. So.
Yeah, the UIs are normally very volatile, and it changed. So normally tests through the UI are very brittle because like we keep changing how we do things. However, the action that we end up performing the same action. For example, that example that I gave, like make a payment. It may be a button, it may be a link, it may be a selection of. So you may change how you get there. The action will end up happening anyway. So normally I have my test on the on click of that button if it was a desktop application. So I test the on click method that normally is just a very thin layer to delegate to my own object, but I try to not have my tests attached to the UI framework. So if you have like a desktop application, like it was the case, my on click, on hover, or whatever it is, would just delegate, would be a single delegation to an object, and then I can test drive everything that I want. But the UI itself, I try to avoid. Sometimes just looking at it and playing, it's faster and works.
Yeah, I think it's important to separate like UI as just being a presentation layer from UI as being like a complex like front-end logic. And if you have a complex front-end logic, it absolutely deserves to be tested. I think it's worth also saying where like you have a complex UI and it is worth testing, it's worth testing right, because I've seen far too many times when like people are getting into this position where like they need to, like they want to test UI and they're like testing it like through multiple layers, like going through like Selenium through 5 layers. It's like if you have a complex enough UI and you feel that you need to test it, please test it, but it's like use Jasmine or like any other like front-end unit testing library. As Sandra said, you need to be careful though to not lock yourself to particular like, presentation layer. You need, if your UI is complex enough, it's worth not only to be tested, but it's worth like being structured properly the same way you're doing on the back end. So separate actual logic from presentation so that you can change presentation without breaking your tests every single time.
In the spirit of listen to your tests, I'd say also that if you're test driving your UI, it would probably lead you to a less complex UI, hopefully.
I don't even know if it's, well, it is definitely possible to test drive a UI, but I think that in case of UI, I probably wouldn't. Because like when you are defining a UI, you are still exploring how you want to play with it. So you don't want to say like, oh, I will write a test to make sure that my button appears there. Normally you would like do like wire mocks or wireframes and then all this kind of stuff, show to people, have them playing. Once it's more stable, then I probably would retrofit test, but not, I wouldn't test drive a UI. I probably would retrofit test to them.
Would you always test the purely visual aspects?
No, I would. As I said before, like if it's very complex, I don't know exactly how complex Alex was referring to, but I would try to avoid. The vast majority of my UIs have no tests. But once again, they have no behavior as well, as Konstantin was saying.
Okay, next question. How do you apply TDD to test non-deterministic code such as machine learning, stochastic modeling, etc.?
Through huge tables of examples, i.e. stochastically.
Yeah, that's one way. Another way is to use maybe statistical methods that I can think of. It's not ideal because it's not real unit testing. It doesn't give you 100% assurance that it works. It gives you more assurance that it works, but not 100%. So that would be one way, but I haven't done that. So.
I can't say for machine learning, but generally the approach, like, the TDD like becomes less useful the more uncertainty you have in the system. So with the systems where you like in undeterministic system where you can't predict the outcome, you literally like it's very hard for me to imagine you using TDD because like TDD is essentially you're predicting or like saying what the outcome should be, which is in a deterministic system you can't say so. So I think you can probably. So machine learning is basically you discovering the capabilities of a machine on throwing like some experiments on it. That's the way I'm understanding it at least. And the way it works is just like a small series of prototypes that I wouldn't probably test. But as soon as you figure out there is some pattern which is important for you, I would probably retrofit some tests or maybe drive some TDD for the small part of logic rather than trying to derive. So it's like in the position where like you have a very high uncertainty in the system, I would not do TDD straight away. I would at least try to do some experiments or the prototyping, and then as soon as I learn that I can stabilize it, I will throw it away and replace it with TDD. That's a general approach outside of machine learning because I can't say with experience there. But it's like spike and stabilize is how you deal with uncertain domains.
I'd also say that TDD generally excels best where you're testing state. If you have something that is utterly stateless, and I don't mean just mutable state, but no state, like a mathematical expression, you wouldn't really test drive it, you prove it. If you have something stateful, you test it. And I think probably with stochastic methods, I think the answer, as far as I know, is that there isn't a good solution yet.
Okay, next question. How to engage students at the start of their education with Agile TDD, etc.?
I can tell you one example from my coaching. I was asked on occasions when I was working with companies to teach somebody who didn't know how to write code, and so what I did is I taught him how to write the test and then how to implement that. And we were working on very simple things like implementing a simple add or stuff like that. And writing the test was very easy because it was clear what's the input, was the output. It was easy to write it. And then actually the implementation was where we could discuss, and I would ask them to write like, how do you think this should be? And then explaining the various bits and pieces of the programming language that they got wrong. And it was great for them because they got immediate feedback that, oh, now I learned something new and it works. And now I learned something else and it works. So my guess is that you can engage people with TDD very early because it's actually, we are biased against TDD. That's my thing. I think it's more natural if you start with it. But because I personally haven't started programming by doing TDD, then I had to retrofit it into my thinking. But if you do start with it, at least from my 2-3 cases that I know, it was very natural.
I think another way, oh, sorry, did you?
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah, I just want to briefly explain what we did at my university. We used to have the software testing in the 3rd year of the bachelor program. So students already programmed for 2 years and then only learned testing. So we said, well, if we're serious about test first, then shouldn't we move testing all the way to the beginning of the curriculum? So that's what we've done now. They get one introductory programming course, because there are some students in the Netherlands, there's no high school level computer science, so we need to get them, some of them to learn something about programming, but then we put testing right behind it so that they don't have what we saw before is for 2 years they gain confidence that they can do it without tests, because the examples in the university are so small that sometimes I do get away with it. So the earlier you push testing into the curriculum, the more I think they get used to this idea of you're not right until you've tested it. So I just want to give the university perspective that we try to move it as early as possible, and that's probably a useful thing to do.
Small examples is a very important thing, I guess, because for like another way to look at TDD is like TDD is basically like you can see it as a coping mechanism where you're trying to cope with an environment of ever increasing complexity because things are changing like very fast and like a lot. And if you think about the examples that we're given like kids or like we're given in the universities, it's like complete opposite of this, like very small problems, very isolated, and it's like as soon as you solved it, you never move on. And it basically creates this environment where you never show to people the kind of problems they will actually deal with in real life, the kind of problems that will actually require tools like TDD, like practices like TDD. So I guess if I tackle this, is just like spend more time on like going with examples and showing examples where you actually change something existing, maybe like through a couple of iterations or an ongoing basis. You show this pressure that the environment puts on your code where code can't cope anymore, so that it illustrates the need for the tools and practices like TDD rather than just like tell guys and just like, look, you need to do TDD, just trust me, you will need it in a couple of years.
I find that most developers like to have a UI for their thoughts, and not specifically a graphic UI, but so some people will use a piece of paper, some people can do it in their heads, crazy people. Others will print line and do it in a REPL. Some people, when they're first starting out in junior school, will have, what's it called, Turtle? Logo, that's the one. And one of the things that's really useful is get the test engine as your go-to UI of choice. So when you want to see what's happening with the code, you write a few really simple tests. Even if you throw those tests away, you're not trying to really express your thoughts. If you're doing something small, it can be just the go-to UI for starting. And when people get into that habit, quite often the more complicated use cases kind of flow from there.
I have a question for Konstantin, who I replaced now, but that's the other a reversed fishbowl. So you said, well, in university and Polytechnical University, what we want to teach them is the real world. A big problem that I've seen in academic world in Belgium is that professors have no clue about the real world. I have been doing workshops on... I talked about Belgium. As far as I know, we haven't annexed you yet, so... yeah, definitely.
That derails quickly, okay?
Yeah, so I think again, it's a question about chicken and egg, but how could we solve that according to you?
So if I was emperor of the earth,
awesome.
No, but technically, I think the key there is just like, it is a chicken and egg problem where like you can't really, there is always like this pressure on people like if you're skilled enough as an engineer, if you're like skilled to the point where like you can work at like the best companies in the world, then they can pay you like a best employee in the world. Mm-hmm. Then you like, there is this preference for like, where would you go? It's like no university will ever be able to pay you as Google. So I think that there needs to change. I feel that there needs to change like relationship in like how the big companies look at the employees and at their future. Companies like Google and other huge conglomerates need to realize that they need to grow skills, they need to grow experts, and like they need to like find a way of like how to teach these experts, like send in maybe professors or like people that are working in Google, like spending some time and like sending them to the universities to teach newcomers as professors.
So, sorry, I'm going to brag again about our amazing university. So one of the things that we do, you don't necessarily need a professor with industrial experience anymore because there's so much open source code that you can also use. So we have an architecture course where students have to find a project on GitHub that they like, a tool they use, and we say you make a pull request. You go through the code, you look at what the architecture is, you reach out to the team, you Skype with the main developers, and you ask them what they would like. So sometimes they like documentation, sometimes they like a specific feature, and you just do that. So they don't necessarily need to learn practical skills from us as professors. We can teach them SAT solvers and model checking, and they can reach out to the community, and that is a way you can get professionals involved. I think it's really hard to get professors to be professionals or to get professionals to be professors. But you can make sure that they learn the relevant skills in a master program and industrial skills through any sorts of collaboration with industry. And we do that with the GitHub course, but of course you can also have guest lectures or internships. So I don't think it would be a matter of transforming people into something they're not. It's just more about synergy. And then Delft University is. That's an awesome program.
Your homework is to get your pull request accepted.
Okay, try that to Linus Torvalds. The next question is, how can we increase diversity in our industry?
So if you were emperor of the world,
That's the one I would start with, yes. I don't know.
Okay, I want to take that one. So maybe the one thing that you can do that would make the world better, if I was the empress of the world, is just recognize unconscious bias in yourself. So there are many research studies that you can read about this. One of the most famous examples is maybe where they had identical resumes with a male name and a female name, and they sent this out to people at universities. And what you saw was that female names not only were rated as less qualified, also got a lower starting salary, and maybe worst of all, got less opportunities for mentoring. And this was not just in male professors, also in female professors. So it's not a matter of, hey, that guy or girl doesn't look like me. It's somehow through TV and books and upbringing, society looks at some people as more qualified as others, and this is not just a gender thing, but there are a lot of other minorities as well. And I even realize that I sometimes do this. We have an internship in my university, and there's a group of girls, and they do a fashion project. And I'm like, oh, why do you do a fashion project? But that is software as well. As long as it's an app, it's just as cool as something more technical. So a nice way to start, even though it's pretty hard, is if you think, oh, that's a pretty lady, she's probably not a programmer. It's okay if you think it, because our whole society makes you think these things. Just if you think it, then don't say it. That would be a good start. And also think, oh, why did I think that? Oh yeah, that's unconscious bias. It's fine if you think it, but don't say it and try to make yourself a better person.
I think you can make it one more step, go into the confrontation. I think that's, for me personally, it's the hardest step. When you see or hear someone else say something like this, go like, no, I do not agree, which is definitely, if you're in an all-male team, not easy. But hey, life is not easy. And we're still on the privileged side, so.
One thing that I'd like in general for every software developer is to learn more about the history of this domain. Because if you start learning about the history, you'll see that most of software development in the beginning was done by women. And I think it's a very important lesson that we should remember. We try to promote this every year. We organize a conference, and every year we speak about the history and remind people that there are a few very important software developers who were women and were very important for this domain. So I don't know if this solves anything, but this is something that we try to do.
Trying to go back to the basics, I guess, to the root is just like, there is this recurrent topic in the community nowadays about empathy and compassion. I think like trying to constantly relate to human beings around you and understanding just like what do they live with. It's just like why do they do this thing? What drives them? And it's like what maybe they're going through in trying to be where they are. And thinking about these things whenever you're addressing them or like you're talking with them and like what your words can cause. It's very important trying to understand that on the other side is a human being. It's not just like a post that you're like sending words to. He has feelings and emotions, and you need to relate to and understand before you're trying to address or like deliver some message.
Okay, so please join in the discussion if you want. You are open to come here. It's good to have many opinions. So I'm just going to read the next question, and hopefully some of you will join. How do you justify software craftsmanship when the most successful technical companies advocate MVPs and move fast and break things?
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to make sure that we understand the same thing by MVP. By saying what MVP is not. MVP is not the crappiest product that you can get out. Okay? So, in order to do a good MVP, you need to do a whole lot of design. And this could include sometimes software design, sometimes less, but you have to do a lot of design.
Move fast and break glass.
Go ahead.
I think there is this misconception about, like, generally I agree, there is a misconception about what MVP means. And I think what people believe MVP is, when they just like hear about the term, it's about cramping as much functionality as possible in the minimal amount of time. Whereas like actual MVP is making sure that you still deliver quality, but the quality at the cost of choosing the right features. So MVP is about choosing which features go into life. It's not about like turning this like tumbler between like how much value you put in. So it's not about delivering the same amount of value that you otherwise would deliver. It's about delivering less features, but at the same quality level as you would, but the more important ones.
Even move fast and break things. If you observe the way, like at Facebook in London, they have posters all over the wall that say move fast and break things. I know several people who work at Facebook who would consider themselves software craftspeople, and they totally agree with that sentiment of move fast and break things. The difference is, when Facebook breaks something, you go on their website, you do not notice, because they have such rigorous engineering practices. Well, maybe you do, Rachel. Well, okay, fine. Rachel's in a very unique position here. As an end user of Facebook, you often don't notice because there's such rigorous engineering practices about their infrastructure, about rollouts, about deployment, about automatic detection of failure. That means that they can break things because they've written all of the code that detects failure. GitHub do the same thing. GitHub don't write a lot of tests. They have a lot of code in order to detect exceptions and roll back, and that works for them. So software craftsmanship is not really about it's not necessarily about write all the tests. It's about delivering quality software to your users, whoever they might be. And if you can do that without tests, fantastic. But it takes a lot of discipline and a lot of rigor. You don't get it for free.
I just wanted to add something about MVP. So MVP stands for minimum viable product, but very often what people are doing is they're trying to do the kind of lean startup cycle of build, measure, learn. If you're going to do any kind of experiment where you want to measure something, you have to think about what you're going to measure, and you very often will probably have some tests around that kind of thing. So you probably will want to build it in a kind of thinking, what is the value test that we're trying to do? Not just like, what might people play with?
So measurement-driven development.
Yeah.
So just think about what your measurement is before you go do all the building, because otherwise you probably build something that's completely useless.
I also think when we talk about quality, there's two axes. We typically, when we talk about quality, we talk about technical quality. And when you do MVPs or when you do lean startup, and even Eric Ries advocated this at some point, until some people slapped him over the head, that technical quality is not that important in the first few sessions. I fully disagree. Technical quality is never up for debate, because whatever you do, you as a developer will always get the backdraft of any shortcuts you take. So
I disagree. So like so not everything is, when you're testing out, is this thing valuable? Do we want to invest in it? You may well throw the whole thing away. You don't necessarily want to build it as if it's like a very beautifully engineered machine, and you usually do have some quality threshold. But what you're trying to do really is to build something. What's the minimum we can get out there where we can test whether there's a market, where we can decide if we want to invest more? And if nobody uses it or you don't get any value from that product, then what you're going to do is scrap it, and it's not worthwhile. And if you do find, wow, there's massive business value in this, then you rewrite it and you keep rewriting it. But you've got to have that culture where you have the right to rewrite things if you're going to try and work in this very experimental way.
I think that the second axis that I was talking about is the functional quality. And this is where, when you say we want the minimum out there, is not the minimum, in my opinion, technical quality, because as you already mentioned, you need measurements. You can put an experiment out there and then go like, meh. But we think it works. We kind of hope. I don't know. It's not going to be enough to just have Google Analytics on that application, depending on what kind of application you're running. So the minimum for me always means from a functional point of view. What is, again, thinking back to the opening keynote, what is the most straightforward way to get information about this experiment? And straightforward typically doesn't mean, it's not the Ferrari that as a developer we like to build, but it's a mode of transportation. It could be a skateboard to get us from A to B, as long as we can validate whether or not people want to go to B. So these are the two axes that I tried to use and say, when we talk about MVPs, we talk about functional quality that we want to minimize. We want to minimize the effort to get to the understanding. It doesn't mean let's do this quick and dirty. Same, even if we're not talking about an MVP, same is true for Agile. We've seen this so many times in the last years. We're going to do this very agile, very sucky, without any technical quality, because we want to go fast. No.
There's an awesome cartoon that's been floating around the internet for a few years now about the lean way of thinking, and it's a picture of the 4 stages of building a car. So you start with the wheels, then you build the chassis, then you build then you put the doors in, and then you put the steering wheel in, and then you have a happy user. And until then, you have a very sad user. And then there's an alternative way, which is you build a skateboard, then you build a scooter, and then you build a bicycle, then you build a car. And that's the lean model, which is you build something that gives you some feedback, and then use that to iterate. And you might end up at the same result, but you've had a happy user since day one.
Going slightly back to the whole tangent on like experimenting and try things out. I don't see anything wrong with going with a small experiment for the sole purpose of learning something and not doing any quality in it, not doing any testing. But you need to understand, if your sole purpose is learning, it is sole purpose of learning. I far too often see the teams like overdoing it, or just like going, it's like, we're learning this, and then it's like, oh, it does work, let's continue working on it. So the first thing you do when you learn is you throw this thing away that you used for learning, and you do it right. So I think that's the whole concept of like Spark and Stabilize that I mentioned previously. Is it's fine to verify some things by just like doing it quick and dirty, but it should be very quick, very small bit of work, and you should literally throw it away and replace it with something proper quality as soon as you learned. Or maybe you learned that it wouldn't work, and then you threw it away, and you didn't overinvest in the wrong thing in the first place.
I'd also say in terms of craftsmanship, the viability thing is really important. If you're talking about, say, a new piece of chat software, maybe having all the features, but they work a bit crappily, will get you out there and get you working. If you're talking about financial software, like almost no features, but they all work exactly well, would be viable, but anything else probably wouldn't. And if you're working on a nuclear power station, don't do that.
If you're working on chat software, I think most people would be much happier with a subset of the features that work exceptionally well. That's the wonderful thing about WhatsApp. That's one of the reasons it got so popular.
It's probably a really bad example. I was trying to think of, if anyone else can think of, what would more features but reliability being poor. Is there anything there?
Nah.
No?
Nah.
Nothing at all.
I mean, there probably is, but I don't want to work on it.
Paint software. Adobe's been doing that for years. There we go.
Oh, good. Here you go.
Gotcha.
Okay, so one thing I did want to say is MVPs, they're kind of like a test for your business. So you come up with a hypothesis, you say what you think is going to happen, you build something to see if it works, and if it doesn't, you throw it away. And it's just test-driven development for your business.
Okay.
That's that problem solved.
Thank you. Next topic is craftsmanship versus good enough. And after that, it will be about work with dependencies. So craftsmanship versus good enough.
Why versus?
Is there a difference?
I mean, it's part of the whole concept of craftsmanship, that you decide when it's good enough, and that you learn and that you share with others and collaborate to figure out when is good enough. Are we going to talk about code coverage? I hope we're not going to talk about that. But how do you decide when it's good enough?
When you're making money?
Well, businesses are just not about only making money, but we get good feedback in, at least.
Yeah, I think we've made a mistake, right? I think that the craftsmanship community made a mistake at the point that we associated craftsmanship with art. And that was a terrible mistake. And I spent the last 2 years and even recently in interviews and stuff, trying to move away from it, because as soon as you associate craftsmanship with art, people think that we are prima donnas, and then that everything that we do is perfect, and blah, blah, and it's not, right? It's productive partnership, it's part of the manifesto, it's collaboration. So which means that whatever work we do, it's to satisfy our customer. If their need is to have MVP to go live, we need to understand that. However, we practice a lot. We try to do things with a good quality, as long as it doesn't slow us down and damage and doesn't help our clients. So craftsmanship has nothing to do with gold plating and providing a perfect solution, right? It's just delivering what our clients need. The only thing is that we really care about it and try to help them. That's about it.
I'd say that understanding good enough probably means understanding the problem domain, understanding what a solution looks like and how the tools work to get you there. And that is craftsmanship, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying somehow to say that early this morning, is just understanding how much do we want to invest right now. So basically, we don't need to have the perfect software. We just say, I think at this point in time, that's where we want to be. We will do it well, but we are not going to invest more than that. And that's an agreement between us and our customers. But craftsmanship has nothing to do with art and all this kind of nonsense.
No? All right. So the next question is, how do you manage work with dependencies? It's not clearer than that. So if it's clear for you, if not, we maybe can ask.
Can you say it again?
Work with dependencies. That's what's written here.
How about if the person who wrote
Yeah.
it comes up and
So if the person who wrote this can
Come on,
explain?
you should join us, right? So come on in, just join, ask your questions, your opinions. No.
Maybe it's an imperative. Work with dependencies.
Yeah.
Drink
Okay.
cola.
Next one. How to maintain understanding through all levels of a company or team?
Oh, that's amazing. So, come again?
That's actually my one.
That's yours.
That's mine.
Shoot. Oh, shit.
Well, it was more for discussion point because I think it's a really hard problem to solve generally.
So can you elaborate on the problem a little bit more?
So we're all sitting around in a conference, hopefully learning how to do things better, or discussing how the solutions and problems that we've come across. And because we're all here, we're all the kind of people who will turn up and will learn about these things. Companies are very often full of people who either can't, won't, or haven't made that effort. And I'd just like to know everyone else's experiences on bringing them into the fold.
I think you can run sessions at least within your team where you do learning together, do code katas and things like that. It can be really helpful. Woody Zool the other day was telling us how he came up with mod programming. That came from every morning that team spent an hour doing practice together. And I thought that was a really interesting way to go. The first thing they did every day was work together to try to improve.
I think it comes down a bit to empathy. I think what you're talking about is lacking motivation, or to...
Well, it's not so much motivation, because people turn up, they do their work. It's what I was trying to kick off the conversation was expanding people's experience and how to get the buy-in.
So I think you gotta figure out what their motivation is in relation to their work. So you might go to work and say, yeah, I want to do something meaningful, I believe in this project, I want to change the world or whatever. But that might not be the case for them. So they might have all different motivations. For some people it's pride, for some people it's money, or it's security even. So if you have someone there who will retire in a year and they just want to get their job done, it's probably not going to work to say, okay, you're going to benefit from this if you invest 6 months afterwards, you're going to be the best programmer. So relate to what they need, and maybe go and say, okay, you might be interested in not having to fix the build for 30 minutes every day. So let's find something together, how we can fix this. And again, as you said, see if it's about giving them the skills to actually do it, and not go like, oh yeah, figure it out yourself. Your tests will tell you what to do. Listen to your tests. No, actually working with them, and I think it was Samir who said at a previous conference, find the weakest link in your team. No? Or you said accidental pairing, for example. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
I used to do what I call ninja pairing, which is when you wait for a coworker to come up and rant at you for 20 minutes about how the thing doesn't work. The thing might be code, or it might be a piece of software they've not used much, or it might be the business. Business doesn't usually work, so that's an easy one. And then you go, especially if it's code, you go up and you say, oh, can you show me? I don't get it. And they take you to their computer, and then they show you and they explain, and they go, oh, I tried this and it doesn't work, and I tried that and it doesn't work, and this thing has got an exception, I don't know where it's coming from, and blah, 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 blah. And then eventually you go, you sit down, you pull up a chair and you sit down next to them. And then 5 minutes later you say, oh, let me try something, and you take the keyboard and do some things, and then they take the keyboard back and do some things, and 4 hours later you're still there, and you've totally solved the problem, and you're working on something else now, but it's fun, and you're both enjoying yourselves. And that's one way I introduce pairing into a team. So I think if you need to sell it to someone, then yeah, as Francie said, you need to know what their motivation is. I used to work with a guy who was a very good programmer. Really good. He taught me a lot, but he didn't do what I didn't understand at the time. He didn't go to evening events. He didn't go to meetups. He didn't go to conferences. And I asked him why one day. He's like, why don't you do all these things? You're very good. Like, don't you want to get better? And he said, no, I want to play my drums and play with my 3-year-old. That sounds reasonable. And he didn't need convincing. He was a TDD practitioner all the way through. But if I had to convince him, and I've used this technique on other people, I'd say, let's make sure you always see your kid. So let's make sure deployment never ever breaks, and you never ever get a support call, because that would suck, right? Then you wouldn't be able to play with your kid. It's about empathy.
So I remember having a very similar panel at Socrates UK about a year ago, where we started talking about what defines good design. And we ended up with a very interesting perspective, which I will talk about tomorrow, so be in the session. And part of that is, I call it usable software design, which basically means we are very focused on convincing people about practices. But how about we go the other way around? And we say, look, you work on this code. What is the most annoying thing for you? And how can we fix that? And it turns out that after a few discussions, one of my friends, Johan Martinsson, did an experiment with one of the teams that he's coaching, and they defined a team agreement that everybody could agree with, because it was very simple. It said, so we want to be able to fix errors very quickly. We want to have few bugs because they are annoying to us. We don't want to have build failures and all this kind of stuff. And they came up with like 4 or 5 different rules. Now, if you start reading those rules that they all agreed upon, you can very easily derive the practices that we talk about. But it brings into the equation the why. Why do we do that? We keep forgetting why we do that. We like it so much that we don't think about why. So I think that's a pity, and we need to change this focus. And, well, there's more tomorrow.
So defining like a common team goal or vision or statement where you said we can all agree on, and then what can we do to achieve this?
Exactly. So after they did that team agreement, it was much easier for Johan to say, okay, so you know how we solved that? By writing tests. How about trying that for a while?
Can I add something else? Yeah? Sure. Okay. So I think one thing that is important here is whatever you have to start from where you are. I don't know who asked the question. Was that yeah? So the answer is never for questions of the sort. Oh, in my organization, how do I convince these people to do that? How do I get these people to do that? The answer is never convince them to do that. The answer is more like understanding context and start from where your context is. I know this is very generic, but organizations move very, very, very slowly. Organizations learn very, very, very slowly. And you need to be sensitive to what causes and changes in organization and what makes culture change. And it goes a lot in line with the group has already expressed here. The idea is that you cannot talk as an adult to change his way of thinking. But what you can do is that engage them in doing things that will automatically change the way you're thinking by the nature of the things you engage in them. So if you have, for example, an idea that was given here, so you try to understand what is it that the team is after, what is the motivation, what is it that, anything that is meaningful in that particular context for that team in terms of goals, in terms of culture of the organization, whatever pattern you can realize for where you are now and expand on that. From our organization, it was 4 years ago, we had virtually no learning happening in an organization. We introduced the code katas 3 years ago. And of course, the people who were already in the company, they would almost never go to the code katas. But the new guys, they start going in there and get excited. And every Friday from 4:30 to 5, from 3 years now, we have this religious code kata thing. We have a 5-day boot camp, whoever joins the company. So they have 5 days of craftsmanship, brainwashed, and that contaminates the rest of the organization. So when the newcomers join the teams, they bring this, they go all with the vibe. So you change the culture from where you are. You don't go back to where you were and change what the past is. You rewrite the future, and you encourage that. And if someone wants to do something in the right direction, you encourage that. You enable communities of practices. You don't create a community of practices, but you enable them. If someone say, I want to do a code kata, okay, so you give them a room, give them the time, and you encourage whatever the teams is. So basically enable it rather than make it happen, force it.
I also feel like sometimes it's not about rational facts. You know, it's not about, oh, this has proven to be better or anything like that, because sometimes some people, they care more about your attitude. So if you go somewhere and you tell them you have been doing it all wrong, how high are the chances that they're going to listen to you? But if you value their skills, for example, if you're a consultant and you go somewhere and you might have lots of technical knowledge, but you don't know much about the domain, valuing their domain knowledge is really important, or they know a lot about the architecture of the system, so you can value that, and that will help you to kind of sympathize with them. And again, it's about empathy and getting that connection where people actually listen to you. And when they start taking your suggestions, so you should know what you're talking about. For example, if you introduce TDD but you don't know much yourself about it, it might actually backfire. So try to learn yourself, educate yourself about these things.
Yeah, you should never ever assume because you know this thing and your colleagues don't that you are smarter than they are. They have good reasons for working the way they do. Either it's always worked, which is a really good reason to keep working the way it's working. So if you're going to change things, don't say we should do this thing because I read it in a book or because I heard that it's better at a conference. We should change this because I have some data that shows that it will mean that we have to respond to 50% less support calls after a year. And then the people who really care about not responding to support calls will go, sweet, that sounds great, let's do it. The people who don't care about support calls because, I don't know, maybe they get lucky.
They like him.
They enjoy them, who knows? We'll not so worried about that, and you might have to come up with a different argument for that sort of thing. But if you can't come up with those arguments, why are you pitching it? Right? If you can't come up with a real argument for how this will improve things, rather than, I heard it's good, or I feel like tests are nice, then why pitch it? That's not helpful.
Don't try to solve a non-existing problem. I tried doing that for quite a few years at the Flemish government, trying to solve the quality issues. Because I thought, somewhere in the industry, they started talking about automated tests, and it kind of made sense to me because there were millions and millions of euros passing through the systems that we were building. And I was the only person. I felt for a while that I must be doing something wrong because I want to do this and the rest doesn't want to do it. And at some point I started realizing, even when project managers came up, I said, well, but quality is not really a big thing here. It's not that big a deal. So sometimes, if you try, even though you might be right, according to a few million people out there, if you're trying to solve a problem that is just not there, it's only there in your perception, it's just going to build up frustration. So maybe, if this is really something that you care about, if you really care about the problem that you see, but the rest doesn't, maybe you become the problem.
If you lose €1 million and you, as part of the Flemish government, that's like a rounding error. So who cares? Not the project managers.
I have no reply for that.
So we have 2 more minutes.
Addy,
Sing a
dance.
song.
Sorry?
Dance.
No.
Sing.
Go on.
No.
Please.
No.
Do your Darth Vader impression. Dark and stormy one.
I can't do that. No, only in Ghent. So the last question, maybe just short answer from each one of you. How to deal with customer change of deadlines?
Sandra, go.
That's easy. Renegotiate scope.
I'm with Alex.
Keep doing the highest priority thing. And when the deadline hits, you'll have done all the highest priority things.
I would say have a look on story maps and you apply the kind of model to story maps, but I only have a few seconds and I can't elaborate on that.
You have 1 minute, so 1 minute story map.
Okay. So that is, you have a visualization of your sprints in user stories and look on the, you have things that are must-haves, things that it has to go in your build, otherwise the build was not going to make sense. things that are delight features, so they'll make your product better than other products, and you have linear features, features that you want to cram into that. If you look at those things, in the West, we have the perception that must-haves are the most important features to go in a release. Isn't that right? The must-have at the top of most code. Professor Kana in Tokyo says that the must-haves are actually the lower type of features. It should deserve the least of your attention, just because they do not add satisfaction to the customer. If something has to be in a software, the customer will expect it to be in software. They're not going to be delighted by it. So you have to find out what is the least amount of effort that you should put in those must-haves. So that's how you descope. Look at the must-haves and what is the minimum possible implementation of the must-haves. That's where you should descope your product to be still on time.
Another even simpler model where you basically, like as everyone said here, you descope things. The most efficient way I know of descoping is you go through the backlog through everything that is left, and you connect it back, or try to connect it back to the reason behind this project existence. So you talk with the business and you ask, just like, what is it you're trying to achieve with this project as a business? And you connect everything back to the business, and you will find out, as I've been in the situations multiple times again and again, you spend half a day with the business connecting everything back to the business goal, and then you find out it's like 70% of the backlog doesn't really deliver anything for them, and you can just throw it away, and suddenly it's 30% of the backlog, and you hit the deadline.
By the way, we all assume that the deadline moves back. Okay. I have a customer that keeps moving the deadline forward, so that's why I'm saying.
Okay, thank you very much for having this panel. Thank you for all the 346 people that were here on these chairs.